So, I'm going to take a rather different approach to the subject this evening. Thomas and I have very different gifts. I think we have broadly similar belief systems. I always enjoy listening to Thomas, and he's a great deal more entertaining to listen to than I am. But I'm afraid you drew the short straw now, because I'm coming second when you're feeling more tired, more sleepy, and I'm going to make greater demands for you keeping awake. But please do your best, because it's sort of polite if you can stay awake. What I'm aiming to do is rather bold. I thought, let's keep this interesting at one level anyway. I want to try and present an alternative and credible framework for reviving the economic future of Europe. So I shall make some fairly bold assertions. I shall make some leaps, but I want to try and say how I think Europe moves out of the present crisis. And I'm going to base that on my general framework, which is that I think we have to recast economic issues in terms of relationships as Christians in order to understand a deeply Christian approach to how we get out of the current mess. So I'm not returning to markets, and I'm also not returning to the state, as you will see. So if you've heard me before, you will know that my fundamental starting point is that I believe Christianity is a relational religion. If you think about the Trinity, the understanding of God being in relationship, the important thing to remember, and this is something that Jeff, for one reason or another, found very exciting a long time ago, it's the idea that relationships precede the physical creation. Before anything came into existence, there were relationships inside the Trinity. In the beginning was the world? No. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word implies that there was somebody speaking and somebody listening. So it's as fundamental as that. And Jesus provided us with a pattern of perfect relationships, or Jesus was the perfect relational person. And the center of history for Christians, you know, is the cross. And the cross is not a financial event. There were no markets involved at the cross. It is supremely a relational event. It is, in the language of Paul, about reconciliation. And I think to understand the pain of the cross, you have to understand and have experienced relational pain. The relational pain of the cross is infinitely greater than the physical pain of the cross. When Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweated great drops of blood, he did so not because he was afraid of the physical pain of the cross. Many other people died on crosses and experienced the same physical pain. What he experienced was the pain, the relational pain of being separated from the Father and the Spirit, with whom he had been perfectly at one for all eternity. So I went the other day to the funeral of my cousin's wife in Norwich, in England. And it was the relational pain of that separation that was so overwhelming. Here was a man who deeply loved his wife for 35 years or so, and the pain of that separation was overwhelming. So what kind of pain did Jesus go through when he was separated in a perfect relationship with his Father, which had gone on from all eternity? And there is some sense in which God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. God was in Christ. So there's no question here of what's being called cosmic child abuse. God was in Christ. So there is a separation going on within the Godhead, and the Godhead is in the cross, and the Godhead is outside the cross. But every part of Christianity has to be rethought from a relationship point of view, including economics. And it is a much bigger paradigm shift than I think we have yet appreciated. So every verse of the epistles is about relationship. If you don't believe me, go home tonight, Look through any epistle you want, in fact, any verse of the Bible you want for that matter, and find one that is not concerned with relationship. And look again at the teaching of Jesus. We have got so embedded into an individualistic way of thinking about the world that we miss so much that is so obvious in the Gospels. So I was preaching, don't preach very often, but I was asked to preach in Kowloon in Hong Kong, and I was asked to speak on Jairus' daughter. You know the story of Jairus' daughter. Jairus comes to Jesus, asks, please come and heal my daughter. So he goes along in the crowd, and this woman reaches out and touches the edge of his cloak. Turns out she's a woman who's had hemorrhages for a long time, for 12 years, in fact. Interesting fact, it was 12 years. How old was Jairus' daughter? Do you remember? 12 years old. So he stops, and he has a long chat with this woman. He, first of all, has to identify her. After everyone laughs, he identifies her, and eventually he says, now tell me the story. So he tells the story. In the end, what does he say to the girl, to the woman? He says to the woman, daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. So he calls her daughter. What is the reason for calling her daughter? Well, two reasons. One is that if you are my daughter, you don't have to come and touch the edge of my cloak next time. The relationship is such that if you're my daughter, of course, you have access to me anytime you want. You have that status. He's transformed her status and, in a sense, thrown a question mark over the whole way she approached him in the first place. He has transformed her life completely. But also, remember that Jairus is watching what is happening here, as well as the disciples and other people. Think about it relationally. Who else is in the circle who is watching what's going on here? Well, Jairus is certainly there, certainly watching, probably getting very fed up with the delay. So what is Jesus saying to Jairus in what he says to the woman? Well, he's saying to Jairus, surely, Jairus, you are really concerned about your daughter. I want you to know that I understand that, because I too have a daughter, and here she is. And I couldn't come to your house to heal your daughter until I'd healed my daughter first, who was here in the crowd. Now, I've read so many commentaries on that passage, but I've never seen it looked at relationally. It's like reading Shakespeare. You can read Shakespeare in terms of simply the individuals in the story, one by one. What is the story of Macbeth? What is the story of the character of Lady Macbeth? But when we study Shakespeare, we don't study it in Western tradition relationally. We don't say, well, let's think about the relationships that Macbeth had. What was his relationship with Lady Macbeth? What was his relationship with Banquo? And then it starts to sound a bit like EastEnders, because EastEnders is all about relationships. So why not study Shakespeare instead of watching EastEnders? So God's interest, though, is not confined to personal relationships, and that's where evangelicalism, I think, has gone so wrong. God's interest is in all relationships, because all relationships between ethnic groups, between nations, and between organizations ultimately involve relationships between people. And God is interested both in the individual form of that relationship and in the organizational or collective form of that relationship. He's interested in both. And we individualize the New Testament at so many points. When Jesus talks about, woe to you, Capernaum, woe to you, Bethsaida, if this had happened in you, then if this had happened in Tyre and Sidon, even they would have repented. And we say, oh no, well, what Jesus is referring to is every individual in Capernaum. So we rule out the collective response. Actually, Jesus meant you as a community, because how other people respond affects how the individual responds, and vice versa. And so all of us are collectively responsible for the kind of system failure that we've seen in Western Europe. All of us have some part in that community breakdown and failure. But if God is interested in inter-organizational relationships, he's interested, presumably, in the price that is paid by a large supermarket chain for milk from the rural producer. In Britain, a big issue is the price paid by Tesco, our biggest supermarket chain, for milk from Cornwall. which appears to be a situation where the very powerful supermarket chain is really screwing down the farmer to the nth degree and really making them get the lowest possible return and taking all the profit out of that they can. So how is that possible? Because of the power relationship that exists between the two. What determines that power relationship is how we organize our capital markets, how we organize the transfer of money and savings between people. So if you assume God is interested in relationships, then you must be interested in the factors that drive those relationships. And that is, in a sense, what a lot of biblical law is concerned with. It's concerned with setting up a set of institutions that will help to ensure some fairness in the way that relationships operate. So behind every financial transaction, behind every economic transaction, lies a relationship. And we have to learn to rethink even the vocabulary that we use almost every day and that I've heard being used in this meeting while I've been here. So we've talked here about developing countries and developed countries. But immediately using that language, you've brought into a capitalist and materialistic paradigm. Because what you meant when you said a developed country was not a relationally developed country. What you meant was a rich country. So let's take the richest, or one of the richest countries of the world, the United States. Is it a developed country? Do you think it's a developed country? Well, think relationally about the United States. Which country, forgive me for this, Michael, won't you? So which country's got the highest divorce rate in the world? Which country's got the most child abuse? Which country has the most loneliness? Let me tell you on latest statistics that 40% of Americans over 45 will self-describe as being chronically lonely. I'll say that again. 40% of Americans over 45 will self-describe as being chronically lonely. Well, loneliness is not a sign of relational health, but of relational poverty. So what I'm suggesting to you is the United States is not a relationally rich country. It is not, I think, from God's point of view, a developed country. I think if God was ranking countries in terms of their development in heaven, he would, of course, see us all as sinful. So all of us, every country is relationally poor in one way or another. But I'm sure that my friends in Kenya would be delighted to find that Kenya was a much more developed country than the United States in God's language, in God's categories. So that's the framework within which I want to suggest we should think about the renewal of Europe. And as you probably may know, relationism or relational thinking, I call a social philosophy which is based on the relational values of the Judeo-Christian tradition. So I'm defining right relationship in terms of, quotes, Judeo-Christian tradition. I won't go into all the reasons why we chose that language, but it's important you know that's the framework. And the point about that is that if I'm going into talk to large companies, as I'm doing a lot at the moment, they will hear me if I go in talking the language of relationship, but they won't hear me if I go in saying, I'm coming to tell you about Christianity. Such is the prejudice that we live with in Western societies. So the language of relationships is a language in some sense of convenience, of access. So I want to move on. Just a couple more bits of background, and there's no time to go into this in detail, but it's really important if you want to understand relational thinking, that God is concerned obviously about conflict in relationships, hence all the language of reconciliation. But God is also concerned, we believe, in what we call relational distance. That is, how far apart are people? How well are they able to understand how other people are thinking and behaving? And what drives relational distance, or what we call relational proximity? And we believe all relationships divide into 5 zones. They divide into the zones of communication and story and information and power and purpose. So that applies to your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your children, your relationship, if you're a school governor, with the parents or the teachers. It applies between a prison officer and a prisoner. Every relationship you can think of between organizations or nations or individuals operates in those 5 zones. And if you want relational proximity, that is the opposite of relational distance, then what you're seeking is directness of communication. Obviously, you learn much more if it's face-to-face. You want continuity in the story over time, because the longer you've known somebody, the better you understand them. And Sean mentioned our long association. We've known each other, though we don't see each other very frequently, sort of, I would say, properly for maybe 7 or 8 years at least. And that's very precious to me, at least. I hope it's precious to him, but it's certainly precious to me.
Yes, it is.
And multiplexity, many-sidedness in the knowledge. And parity in the area of power. That's not equality, but it's about mutual respect, participation in decisions, a fair sharing of risk and reward. And you want commonality, shared goals, and shared values, shared handling of difference. So why then, with that as background, if you want to read more of that, wrote a book called The Relational Manager, another one called Transforming Capitalism from Within. Those are all described in those books. So why focus on relational issues? Well, very briefly, capitalism is an exclusively materialistic vision. It is looking the wrong way. It is looking the wrong way because human happiness and well-being does not come primarily from people's income and wealth. It comes from the quality and strength of their relationships. There's study after study to show that. And this is not arguing against an enterprise economy. It is simply arguing against a capitalist economy, because capitalism is not just about enterprise. It's about a whole set of institutions that have been put in to govern enterprise. But the greater concern for looking at relationships is the realization that capitalism is associated with relationship breakdown. Capitalism destroys relationships. And for that reason, Christians have to ask very big questions about capitalism. It destroys human relationships. It does that partly by moving capital to where it can be used most, quotes, efficiently, but without looking, of course, at the side effects of that movement. Because when you move capital, in the end, you move labor. When you move labor, you're moving people, families, households. And that moves people away from their parents and their grandparents. It moves children from one school to another, from their friends, from their relatives. It completely changes the social pattern so that communities don't know each other anymore because of this mobility of labor. At least that is one of the big driving forces around the fact that people don't know the names of their next door neighbors anymore, let alone never had a proper conversation with them. And it's also the driver of the breakdown of workplace relationships. There's 2 particular areas to mention. One is the size of pay differentials. I still can't get over this. I mentioned it this afternoon. I'm mentioning it again now. So the person on the checkout in a supermarket gets less than 1% of the salary of the chief executive. And in South Africa, it's closer to 1,000th of the salary of the chief executive of the supermarket chain. But just take 1% of the salary of the chief executive. How morally do you justify that kind of wage differential? Now, as Thomas said, markets are simply human creations. This is people making decisions in remuneration committees and other systems. And we could talk about why the remuneration committees are so corrupt to endorse this kind of pay differential. But why is it that Christians are not shouting about this? I'll tell you why. Most of them are not on the 1%. Most of us are middle class, middle managers, or senior managers even. We are not feeling the pain of these low salaries. But my brothers and sisters, we need to feel the pain of the people who live without knowing how they're going to pay their debts, without knowing how they're going to pay their rent or their mortgage, because they are on such low salaries, while other people are taking these gigantic salaries, way beyond anything they can reasonably be expected to spend on things that are credible and useful. But also, of course, technology drives this relational distance, and that combined with very large company size means that many, many people today are working in virtual teams and not face-to-face teams. But we need a relational focus also because our ability to create jobs and also the quality of our public service delivery depends on the quality of relationships. When you get old and somebody puts you into a care home, let me tell you, it's going to be really important to you, the quality of relationships that exist between the care provider and you as the care person living in that home. There are more and more cases of people in those homes being treated brutally. And that's because we're creating a society where relationships have simply been discounted, and we shall pay the price if we don't do something about it. Now, how do we renew Europe? I think we have to look at 9 relationships. I'm not sure I'm going to have time for all of these, but I'll throw out some of them anyway. Firstly, between nation and nation in the Eurozone. I said this morning that I was very concerned about the injustice in the relationship between Germany and Greece and Spain. You see it in the employment numbers. And I explained the reasoning behind it. The trouble is, I would need 10 minutes on this, and I haven't got 10 minutes. But it's to do with the fact that the ability to create jobs is about where you fix your exchange rate. And everybody wants a low exchange rate so that they can create jobs in their country. In Spain and Greece, the euro means that the exchange rate is fixed artificially very high for them. And for Germany, the exchange rate is fixed artificially low for them. So they get the jobs, and Spain and Greece don't get jobs. And if we were to get a northern euro and a southern euro tomorrow, the southern euro for the South Med, the Med countries, the Med Club countries, would probably be 25 to 50% below the northern euro level. And what I'm suggesting is that if you want to correct the unemployment in Spain and Greece for those millions of young people who are now unemployed with no hope of a job, we have got to deconstruct the euro. We just have to do it, and we have to do it fast, because there's no way that we can transfer enough money in any reasonable way to these southern European countries. It's just not going to happen. So we must deconstruct the euro and have, if you like, a northern euro and a southern euro, or let Greece and Spain come out and remain members of the EU, but just don't insist they must be members of the euro, because as long as they're in there, they're going to suffer this appalling unemployment. Now, if anyone's got a better idea, if Thomas can come up with a better idea, I very much want to hear it. In the question time, let's have it. Secondly, we need some kind of intergenerational settlement. My generation has really screwed the younger generation. We have borrowed a gigantic amount of money that we're not going to repay, but our children have got to repay. Or we've got to do something grossly immoral, like simply cause rampant inflation in order to get rid of it, and then we are immorally taking the money from poorer people and savers who otherwise have no way to defend themselves. So there needs to be an intergenerational settlement of some kind. I think it needs to be explicit, a covenant of some kind. There are all kinds of things we could do. In Britain, I've started talking about a jubilee for student debt. But how you finance that, and how in particular you make my generation pay for it, we could have lots of discussions. Maybe we could put a tax on all homes that are over £1 million or over £500,000, because most of those homes that are being owned outright anyway are owned by older people. But we've got to find ways that the older people can start to pay this money back, so we're not landing this debt on our children who were never consulted about it. We never asked them, do you mind if we borrow all this money so we can have a good life and you will pay for us later? What do you think they'd have said if we'd asked them? Don't you think that is an act of gross injustice against the younger generation? Why should we land it all on them? And the interest payments and everything that goes along with it. Thirdly, we need a new relationship between the investor, the provider of funds, and the user of funds. Jesus points this out very strongly in the parable of the talents. So in the parable of the talents, what happens is that the king asks this question to the person who buried the talent. The king asks, "Why did you bury the talent?" And the servant says, "Well, I buried the talent because I knew you were a hard person who reaps where they haven't sown." "Ah," says the king. "Well, if that's the kind of man I am, if you thought I was a man who was a hard person who reaps where they don't sow, well, what you should have done is put my money in the bank, and I would have got it back with interest." So what Jesus is saying, I think, is that if you take money on interest, you are a hard person, unrelational person, who is reaping where they haven't sown. You are sitting at home like this, with your feet on the desk, like this, and you put your money in the bank, and then you're just waiting for all the money to come back to you, and you've done absolutely nothing to earn it. Ah, you say, "Well, I've taken risk, you see. I've taken risk." So my answer then to you is, well, do we see investing, do we see putting money in the stock market as any different from putting money in a casino? Or putting your money on horses at the races? Is that what we're endorsing? Just get your money back without putting any significant input into the process. And Jesus is saying that's just not something that God endorses. And he calls the servant a lazy servant. And I think that's significant because it's a sign of laziness. You're not prepared to do the work, make the effort, go to the meeting, call people to account. Shareholders are meant to hold directors to account. Surely we should take our actions in Britain against the shareholders in the big banks who appointed such lousy directors and failed to supervise them that the directors wrecked our economy. Shouldn't we do that? We're even today in Britain, we're still borrowing £2,000 a head from the rest of the world. A family of 5 in Britain is borrowing £10,000 from the rest of the world to support our lifestyle, even after all the cuts. How do you defend that morally in a world where we're one of the richest countries in the world? Mind you, the Americans have been doing it for longer than us. But I just don't think you can defend that morally. There's a lot of morality behind what goes on in economic transactions, as Thomas indicated, in a slightly different way. So, what we're calling for is people who invest need to engage with where their money is placed. It's going to be no good on the day of judgment saying to the Lord, "I got 5.5% on my pension fund, and Thomas over there only got 4.5%, so you can see, Lord, what a great steward of the money you gave me I've been." And the Lord will say to me, "Well, I tracked where your money went, and actually what you were doing was supporting pornographic websites and their construction. Is that what you're proud of?" Well, you say, "I didn't know I was doing that. I just gave it to the pension fund, who gave it to the fund manager, who put it in, quotes the market." And the Lord will say, "Well, why didn't you track where it went? Why didn't you know where your money went and how it was spent? Capital is valuable. It's not scarce." Well, it is scarce, and that's why it's valuable. You see where I'm driving. We need to know where our savings are going, including our pension funds. We need to know they're used properly, and we need to go to those companies where it's invested and hold those managers to account. Do you give your people time off? Are they working 70 hours a week? Are you putting them under undue stress by downsizing? And not just put it in the market where the transactions on average now on the stock market take 22 seconds. People hold shares on average in the stock market today for 22 seconds. How do you exercise accountability for how money is used in a company in 22 seconds? Tell me. So, that's only the first 3. How much longer have I got? Am I out of time? Right. I'll just take banks and taxpayers and probably skip to the end. So between banks and taxpayers, there is a relationship between banks and taxpayers. And I think the important verse to always remember is from Proverbs, that the borrower is the slave of the lender. Why doesn't God like debt? Because it upsets what we call parity. Each of those 5 areas that I described earlier is a major biblical theme. And God is interested in parity, mutual respect, to prevent an abuse of power. And the borrower is the slave of the lender. The lender has the power over the borrower in a very unhealthy way. And if you look at this ban on interest, it's not only there in Leviticus, it's there in Deuteronomy, where it's stated in a very general sense. And by the way, the word does not just mean excessive interest, it means all interest. And then it comes up in the Psalms, then it comes up in Ezekiel, then it comes up in Nehemiah, and then it comes up in Romans. God does not like debt, and God makes it such in the Old Testament that it's very unattractive to lend, because every 7 years all the debt is wiped out. So why lend if the debt is going to be wiped out? So what has been happening is that banks have been lending not just what they're allowed to lend, 33 times the amount of their share capital, but up to 70 times their share capital. So that means if even 3% of their loans go wrong, all of their share capital is wiped out, and they have to go somewhere looking for some extra money. And usually that means coming to us as the taxpayer. So there is an implicit guarantee from governments that they will always bail out the banks. And in Britain it's been calculated that that's worth to the banks about £35 billion a year in Britain. That implicit guarantee is worth that amount to the banks. Now what the Banking Committee in Britain has suggested is that the maximum leverage that the bank should use, the maximum number of times they can multiply up what they lend compared to their own capital, should be reduced from 33 times, which is what the Basel Committee is saying, down to 25 times. And Paul Mills and I would say reduce it down to 10 times or 5 times. Reduce it right down. Because otherwise all you're doing is putting at risk the money from the taxpayers, or perhaps from the taxpayers' children, if you operate like most Western governments. And all of that involves something that is fundamentally wrong. Well, there are 4 key relationships that need to be examined. I'm going to cheat and mention one more, which is the last one there, between city regions in the global economy. I think this is key to how Europe's economy is going to be renewed after you've got rid of the debt problems. And it's this. It's just this simple idea. It comes from a Harvard professor called Michael Porter. It's described on page 217 of my book, The R Factor, which was published in 1993, so it's not a new idea. But it's a very important relational idea. What it says is this, that in the future of the global economy, cities or city regions, that's cities and their hinterland, around the world are going to compete. And if you're going to have a successful economy, you've got to have the best, the most efficient, the lowest cost and the best quality product or service to be able to offer it in the global market, in competition with what's going on in China and Singapore. I go out there a lot, and the energy and efficiency of those economies is truly awesome. So we need to develop centers of excellence in each of the major towns and cities of Europe, where not only do a number of companies come together to form a center of excellence, but university education and research is focused into those areas in those cities and towns, so that you combine the research with the production of the product or service. So, much more to be said, but thank you very much. I shall stop there, and we'll see what questions there are a bit later. Thank you.